I was on D yard, and D yard was like the most active yard. And I remember my first night, we have 8-man cells. I was sleeping and there was a couple and they started fighting. And not just regular fighting, but like the male or the guy of the relationship, like, you know, he pulls out a broom and starts to like hit her and everybody's just ignoring it. You know, I was like, I have to get out of this room because it was like so tense. And then a couple days later, something had happened where the person who was in my bunk before me, anyway, they ended up like beating the shit out of her, you know, in the room, and where we had to like clean the blood off of like our shoes. And I was like, this is like really prison, you know?
Yeah.
That's when I realized that like I don't want to die in prison.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to 30 to Life. It's your boy Uso Ron, and today we got a special guest. It's good to have her here. So you guys just sit back and relax, and we're gonna dive deep into some real good conversation here, and we'll get back with you guys in a moment. How you doing, Wynn?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me.
Good. I'm happy you're here. Thank you for coming. We met online, of course. I've been digging and looking for people to interview, people who are out there working with the communities, sharing their stories and everything. And I see that you've been doing that. Before we dig deep into what you've been up to, let's talk about where you're from and what it's like where you were growing up.
Okay, so I grew up in Orange County in Fountain Valley. You know, my parents immigrated here from Vietnam, and so I'm first generation. And where I grew up during the time, there wasn't a lot of Asian people, so it was predominantly white. And I remember like not understanding like why I was different, but knew that I was different. And so my parents, you know, they're Vietnamese, they're very strong like Vietnamese culture, and we didn't really talk a lot about like emotions. We didn't talk about feelings or anything. And I remember as a child, I remember feeling like I had a lot of feelings. I had a lot of emotions, and I'm not a very reserved child. And, you know, Asians are very known for being reserved. So I kind of always felt like I was too much in my family, and that, you know, I had too much energy. I had too many feelings. And so it was hard to grow up like that. And then to see my friends that I was in school with, like the dynamic with their family. And I was like, I knew that something was different with ours, you know, and I couldn't figure it out at the time. So it was hard. If I felt different, and my parents switched schools a lot. So every year or two, my dad would find a better school. So whether it was like a different Catholic school or another school in the area, then I switched a lot. So I really never felt that like grounding, like with either my classmates or something. So I felt kind of like I was always like floating. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah. Like not really sure where you fit in.
Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of have a similar background myself. I grew up in Vacaville, and there was no Samoans out there. And so I kind of just got in where I fit in as well. So I know what you're talking about. And it just felt weird the whole time, because not being around people that were like me and the household that I was growing up in, I felt really different, like what you're saying. So was that hard for you to make friends, or, you know, were you kind of like in an odd group type person?
It wasn't really hard for me to make friends. I felt like I could make friends quickly. It was that I didn't know how to make deep, lasting friendships, because as soon as I would, then I would have to switch schools. So I learned how to like quickly kind of adapt to my surroundings and be whoever I needed to be to fit in. And then, but like I said, like I didn't know how to keep friends for a long time. Right. And because I would change schools and everything. So that part was like tricky. And so I think I learned that adaptability really young.
Yeah. I understand. I kind of didn't really feel like I fit in with a lot of people. So I kind of got involved with gangs. And well, I did get involved with gangs, and you know, I started drinking at an early age, things like that, dabbling in things like marijuana or substances because of the fact that I didn't feel like I fit in, or I just wanted to kind of stand out, or maybe kind of make an impression on people and make myself feel like I fit in. Is this something that you got involved in? You didn't get involved with gangs?
You know, it's funny. Like later on in my story, I kind of did, but like not the way that everybody thinks. I think, but I did start drinking, smoking pot at a young age because that's what people did, or that's people that I was hanging out with, and you know, it just felt like I remember feeling like it kind of quieted my brain a little bit, you know, and then when I just got introduced to meth, and that was like it was a wrap after that. You know, I felt like it made me the best version of myself. And it just kind of led me down the road to, where I ended up in prison and then got introduced to gangs. Mm-hmm. And it's funny that like, I never was like part of a gang, but they have me as part of a gang. So that's actually like part of my strikes is like criminal street gang.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. It's kind of weird because they have me like really associated with with the different gangs, but I never was part of it. Mm-hmm. I think I just was there.
Around the crowds?
Yeah.
Okay. And so like getting in trouble around the crowds, it just basically grouped you into the gang stuff. Mm-hmm. And you said that they gave you like a strike?
Yeah, I got 2 strikes. So one was for street terrorism and one was for the benefit of the gang.
Wow. So is that like gang enhancement type thing?
Yeah.
Wow. So you caught a separate charge and then they tacked those on.
Yeah.
Man, what year was this?
It was in the early 2000s when they were handing it out to everybody. It was kind of like if you breathed in the wrong direction, they were like, "Oh, gang enhancement."
Yeah, that's messed up. And they can ruin your life like that, especially if you're not involved in that type of stuff.
Yeah, no, for sure. And then even when it kind of followed me into prison, I think they did try to validate me as a gang member in prison. And I was like, I don't even understand what's happening. And so it was just like a different experience, Mm-hmm. But again, it was just, I wanted to fit in. So I'd found a group that I felt like I could fit in with. I sold drugs, did all the things that go along with getting high and everything. And just because that's what we did. Mm-hmm.
Right. And you said your drug of choice was meth. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. How old were you when you started doing meth?
I was probably like around 16. Mm-hmm. And, it was just like kind of doing lines in class, doing lines in the bathroom. And, I always say like meth is like such a perfect drug for girls, because we don't eat as much, we have more energy, mm-hmm. And we're able to do all the different things. And I thought I was a good student. I was in AP classes and everything. And I was able to study, longer. I was able to get more focused. And I went to Cal State Long Beach right out of high school. And, but that's when like the addiction started to get like into where it was like not just for fun. It wasn't like on the weekend and where I would stay up for a long period of time and I wasn't able to go to classes. I was like just partying all the time. That's all I wanted to do. I ended up getting kicked out of school and then kicked out of my parents' house as well.
Right. Did you get kicked out for what? Just not showing up to class? Or?
Yeah, pretty much not showing up to class. And then also on the campus, you could drink if you were a minor, which they probably don't love that I'm saying on the podcast, but it just, I wouldn't go to class and I got kicked out. So,
So after you got kicked out of college, I assume that's when, really spiraled out of control and you got in trouble with the law.
Yeah, I think it was my parents kicked me out and I didn't really know what to do without, but it's funny because like, even though they kicked me out, my parents, like they're Asian parents. So they're like, oh, it's funny when I think back is that they kicked me out, but my dad's like, here's like 8 brand new towels, like take it with you, and then I think they realized that, oh, we just kicked her out. What is she going to do? And my mom was like begging me to come back home. And I was like, no, you kicked me out. Like, I'm going to go live my life.
Yeah.
And I moved in with a friend. And I think, it just kind of like, I didn't have anything to really like anchor me to like trying to keep my life together. So I did and I was hanging out with other people that were in that lifestyle. And I think I got arrested the first time like at the age of 23.
That's kind of late in the game if you really look at it. So with being Vietnamese and growing up in a Vietnamese household, is something like this really frowned upon? Because I have Asian friends and, a lot of times they don't even like to speak about just prison experience or anything like that. Was it something that was really hard for your family and for them to deal with you and maybe even forgive you?
Yeah, no, for sure. Because the first time when I got arrested, I got OR'd, and then I like a couple months later, I picked up my controlling case. I bailed myself out, and so when I saw that the extensiveness of my case, and that's when I was like, okay, I have to tell my parents. This whole time they had never known that I'd gotten arrested, and I was like, hey, this is what happened, and they jumped into like, oh, I have to save my child mode. So, but they didn't tell anybody what was happening, and I remember my dad was like, well, do you think it's maybe because you're bipolar? And I was like, yeah, maybe it's because of that. So, we went and he paid for me to go see a therapist. I got on meds. and he was like, that's why you're like acting crazy, is because like you have this mental diagnosis. And I think that was for him the way that he could rationalize like what was happening. And, they paid a lot of money for me to not go to prison. And, I had a private lawyer, and they said, okay, because I had the diagnosis and with the substance use, they're like, okay, so go to this private pay rehab. So my parents paid for me to go there. And even then, that was really kept a secret too. My parents, it's with Asians, you have to be perfect. And I was not perfect, and my mom used to tell me, like, none of my friends have this problem. Like, because none of your friends are talking about it,
Right.
I promise you, like, I'm not the only one, but you guys don't talk about it, so you don't know.
Right.
So I think a lot of that shame too, like, lives in that, the secrecy lives in that. And it was like really instilled in me too. Like, there was so much shame involved in what I was doing. But when I got out of treatment, I started getting high again. And then when I had signed for that big case, my lawyer was like, don't get in trouble again. You have a joint suspended sentence. And I was like, I didn't know what that meant, at the time. So when I got in trouble again, and then this time my parents got another lawyer, and I had to do a county program, but I didn't finish that one. And then that's when they sent me to prison. And even then, my parents told people that they told my grandma that I was in school. Like,
yeah.
And so not a lot of people knew.
Right. Yeah, I do understand that because of the fact that I do have Asian friends. And so I see a lot of them struggle with opening up because of their upbringing and things like that. Let me ask you this. Was it something that, like, your dad mentioned bipolar, but was it something more deeper, like, if anything, in childhood, to where you were acting out or running to these drugs? I know it was hard to fit in your community, but like for me, for example, I went through a lot of abuse. And so I think that drinking for me became something that numbed me a lot. And even hanging out with gang members, I felt more like a family dynamic with them, people I could trust. How about for yourself? Was there something that may have triggered you to act this way as an adult, to get involved in drugs and get in trouble like that as well?
No, for sure. I think, a lot of times we focus on like the big traumas and everything, and that there's other trauma that people experience. And so while I didn't have like a big trauma, I had like the little trauma, the little T of, the emotional disconnect from my family. And it's like, now that like I, have this education, I can understand that like I never felt connected to my mom, I never felt that love and support from my family. And so that's what in myself, I was trying to like find it in other people. I was trying to find it in something, and I found it in the drugs. I found it in the people I was hanging out with. Like you said, like I felt more family with them than I did with my own family.
Right.
I felt like the people that I was hanging out with, they were like, could appreciate like who I was. Whereas with my family, I always felt like awkward. Like, like I would say something and I feel like everybody would look at me and just be like, what's wrong with you?
Always walking on eggshells.
Yeah.
I can see that with a lot of us Islanders and Asians, we're not allowed to really express certain things at home, like it's a difficult subject to speak about, especially like a lot of people don't know how we grow up in our house. So like you said, you had a little bit of trauma, that little small things, you felt like you weren't close to your mom, and you went out and started getting with friends and doing drugs and things like that. For me, it was gangs. Now, with women and men, we kind of tend to act towards trauma differently. Men like to get violent at times, because of the trauma. For women kind of gravitate to people who are, abusive or doing drugs, or maybe just people like that are toxic for them. Now, was this the case for you as well?
Yeah, no, I remember my first like serious boyfriend. He was older than me, and at first I didn't really see it, but it was very emotionally abusive, and actually he lived in Hawaii. I met him when we were on family vacation, and then so I would go and see him, but he would I would end up crying on the phone, and he would tell me like that I was worthless, that I was, and he would make me say it, so it just further ingrained like what I felt about myself, and like that I wasn't worth anything, and that I probably stayed in that relationship for about 2 years, and it just kind of, that was the beginning of the cycle of emotionally abusive like relationships. And eventually it escalated to where I had boyfriends who would hit me, and beat me. And I think, the hardest part about that is having to like face people when you have like bruises on your face. And I used to hate that look of pity that people would give me. And so I stopped going around people. I stopped going around my friends. And I know in the last abusive relationship I had, if my friends started like kind of saying too much, I'd be like, I'm just not going to hang out with you. Cause like, I'm going to go back to him. Like no matter how bad it gets, like I'm just going to go back. Cause I didn't think I deserved anything better.
Right. So a lot of that has to do with low self-esteem and just not feeling right about yourself. Right.
Yeah.
So it took you about 2 years to get out of that abusive relationship, you said?
The last one. So, well, yes. Well, the one that was with the hitting, it was probably about like 2 years. And then there was one after that where that was back to like an emotionally abusive relationship. And I think that one I had when I was in my in sobriety. And so I ended that one about 2 years. And when I ended that relationship with him, that's when I knew that I was still sick. That's when I knew that I still had so many things within myself that I needed to work through. And and that's when I reached out to this therapist that I'd known through the program, and started doing like Al-Anon. And I realized that like my addiction, like my third addiction, is with people. The codependency, and that kind of stems from the childhood of wanting to control people, the people pleasing too. Of making sure that I looked always perfect and taking care of other people. That like manifested into these like abusive relationships, into like relationships where I was so scared of being alone that I would stay with somebody, that I would accept all these things and try to like make excuses of like why they're drinking, why they're getting high, and why they're cheating on me,
What really clicked in your head, where you're just like, I'm done with this shit. I don't want to deal with this no more.
I remember because he would go out drinking and come back, and one night we were laying there and I knew that he was high, and I was like, I'm gonna get high with you, and I knew it, and and he's like, what are you talking about? Like, you're crazy. And I'm like, it's 2:00 in the morning and you cannot sleep. You're like wide awake. And but the fact that like at that time that I was like, I'm just going to get high with you. I'm just going to drink with you. And then, things happened where like, then he ended up like just really going into his addiction and left. And I think in that moment I knew that I couldn't go down like that road with him. And I think he really cut it off, where he like blocked my number and everything. And I, at that moment, like I was so obsessed. It was like another addiction. And then, but once he like cut off that contact and I was able to see like how like insane I was getting, that's when I was like, I can't do this. Like, and I think, they talk about like some in the program that God does for us what we can't do for ourselves. And I think that's when he was showing me like I'm taking care of this for you, and that's when I like started relying on I had friends who were really supportive that, while I was like kind of like fighting, trying to like, go stalk him, go like find out where he was, I would go over to their house and sit with them, and there was never a judgment. I never felt that if I needed to go and we would go out to eat, we would do things, but it was really the therapy that helped me the most. And I think working Al-Anon, that I was able to see that side of myself that I never really had worked through.
Well, I'm glad you got out of that.
Me too.
During these times, were you dealing with prison as well?
No, I paroled. The last time I paroled was in 2015.
Okay.
And then, so this was probably about 4 years ago, 3 years ago. So I'd been out. So
okay.
I haven't been back to prison since then. Thank God.
That's a good thing.
Yeah.
Okay. So now with prison, what was that like? Was that from drug addiction?
Yeah, it was all from drug addiction. So it was like sales. A lot of my charges are for sales. And then, like the strikes just kind of made it different. Like, so when I picked up these sales charges, and towards the end, there was like a few like petty theft, but it all went back to like my addiction. All my charges are like revolve around there.
Right. So you did like small stints in prison, or?
Yeah. So like 4 years was the first one. And then I did a year violation, and that was like related to like the gang stuff. And then I did 3 years the last time.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm glad you're not doing that no more as well. So what about for prison? I mean, what was the last straw for you on that?
So, you know about the women's prisons, but there's CIW, Chowchilla, and there used to be, what's the one across the street from Chowchilla? Starts VSP.
Okay.
And then there's a couple like level 2 ones. So the first 2 ones, I went down to CIW. And, you know, I'm from Orange County. That's like close to Orange County. So it was like a lot of my friends were there. You know, I worked in the warehouse, the receiving warehouse. I drove the forklift. I was the clerk there, you know, and a lot of my friends were there. And it was kind of fun, you know. My first prison term, I kind of, like I said, I adapted quickly. And all the people that I knew, like they were there too, all my friends. And it wasn't bad, you know. It really wasn't that bad. And even the second time I went to prison, it was the same thing. But this last time when I was there, they kept me up at Chowchilla, and I'd never stayed there. I'd only done receiving up at Chowchilla. And then they sent me, I was on D yard, and D yard was like the most active yard. And I remember my first night, we have 8-man cells, and I was sleeping, or, you know, we're sleeping, and there was, you know, a couple, and they started fighting. And not just regular fighting, but like the male or the guy of the relationship, like, you know, he pulls out a broom and starts to like hit her, and we're like, everybody's just ignoring it. And then, you know, I was like, I have to get out of this room because it was like so tense. And then a couple days later, something had happened where the person who was in my bunk before me, they ended up like beating the shit out of her, you know, in the room, and where we had to like clean the blood off of like our shoes. And I was like, this is like really prison, you know?
Yeah.
This is really prison. And it just kind of like, I had that tense feeling that whole time, and just like walking around and, you know, just never knowing like what might set somebody off, you know?
Right.
And I remember like thinking like, that's when I realized that like, I don't want to die in prison. And before that, I think I was kind of okay with dying either in my addiction or in prison, because I knew that's where my life was headed. And, these things, and just like walking around with that misery, you know, that heavy feeling of like, you know, that only people in prison like understand. And I'm sure it's not like what the guys have, but like, it's just that like not always being on that alert. It's hard. And survival, you know, and just making sure that like everything is good, and that like if something's going to happen, you know. And that was the time they were starting to do the ankle monitor program. And so you had to go to board. And I had applied, and I was like, okay, I'm going to get out. And when I went to board, everybody kept telling me, like, you just have to show some remorse. You just have to, like, cry. They like emotion.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay. And for the first time in my life, I couldn't do that. I was, like, trying to pull up any emotion. And I was like, I feel like I'm dead inside. And they kept asking me questions. And I remember getting so mad. And I was like, no, you don't understand. Like, I've changed. Like, I'm not that person anymore. Like, I promise if you let me out, like, I'm going to, like, change my life. I'm never coming back to prison. And they're like, we don't believe you. And I got out of the board, and they denied me. And I remember going back to my cell, and I was so upset. And then finally I cried. And I remember as I was like replaying everything, then I also remembered a conversation that I had on the yard a couple days ago with my friends of, hey, when I get out, I'm going to start sending in drugs, and we're going to make a lot of money. And that's when I knew that like they were right, that if I got out, that I was going to come back. And like the last time when I went to court, that's where like kind of like the strike started coming into play a little bit, where they were like, you're looking at 10 years at 80%. And I was like, what do you mean? I'm just selling drugs, you know? And they're like, but it's the strikes. They're doubling the sentence. And so I feel like a lot of these things, like God showed me like what my life was going to be like, but he also showed me that's not his plan.
Right.
You know, and he's like, but he was giving me that kind of that choice, like, hey, this is what you're gonna be looking at, but you're not gonna get it now. But I knew in my heart that like if I didn't change, that I was gonna come back and die in prison, and I didn't want that. Right. And so, you know, it was October 3rd, 2014.
That's right. You know, it's funny. It's not funny, but only people who believe in God will know that. The signs and what you're talking about right there. I've had those signs, and like you said, like I didn't get out that day because you had different motives of what you were going to do when you get out, and it wasn't meant for you. And then you got shown the 10 years and you're like, you know what? Yeah. God had to show you that. Good thing you're not as hard-headed as I am. I had to make a lot of mistakes and you know, and go through a lot of shit, but Yeah, I'm glad to be here. I'm glad you're here.
I'm glad you're here.
So I don't want to like go all over the place, but I've always been interested in this with women. I wanted to ask you, do women have a lot of support? Like as far as, see, like with men, I have my wife, and my daughter was 2 when I fell. I did 10 years in there. And for the majority of my time, my wife made sure that I had a relationship with her, like by bringing her to visit, even though my wife left me and did her thing for a little while. She made sure that I had a relationship with my kid. And just having that outside, support, knowing that someone outside cares about me, knowing that someone's coming to visit me, helped me actually avoid a lot of trouble while incarcerated. So I had that support. And I see a lot of men who have a lot of support from women, that come and visit them and stand in them lines in the cold and everything. Is it like that for women in prison? Is there a lot of men waiting outside to come inside to visit? Visit you guys?
So yes and no. It's not like how it is for the men. Like I think with the men, like, there's like 10 women who will kind of like be there to support the guy. But I think with women is that there is, but the men that are coming in are, they're tricks, And so to keep that level of engagement, I've seen like the things that the women need to do to make sure that these guys keep coming in.
Wow.
And so it goes back to like they're not in control of it as much as they like to say, they have to talk to these guys a certain way. They have to, do these. And so I think it further builds that like shame and that like, the kind of the lengths that they have to go. And I don't think like as guys, like you guys have to do that as much, like, more like even then I think on that side, more the women are doing the other things, right? And you guys are just there, and you have women, where women, we still have to do like play that role, and for the guys to come in. And if you think about it too, like women are the caregivers, they're the like the role, the nurturers of the family. So when you take that out of the family, then they're the guy, not to generalize everything, but usually the guys that are at home aren't going to be like as caretaking for the women as like if the situation was reversed.
I agree. Yeah, I agree. And it's sad. So for women, you guys really have to fend for yourselves a lot. And then, like you said, it probably can do a lot to your mental, not feeling like people care or really just, want to be there for you. Like I said, it was really good that I had that support system because it kept me out of a lot of trouble. What was your main focus to keep yourself out of this trouble or, to make it through those prison stints?
I don't know. Let me think of my main. I think it was just to get out, like, to survive.
I want to be out of here.
Yeah, to survive. And then I didn't really know what was going to happen outside of, I knew that what I needed to do to keep my parents happy and to keep parole happy. But as far as for me, it was just like still survival, and I had a therapist ask me one time, like, do you want to stay sober? And I was like, no. So for me, it was like, I'm just going to do the things. And if I have to stay sober, then I will for as long as everybody needs me to. And then I'm going to go back and get high. So I didn't really, that my focus was just to kind of get out of prison and then do what I needed to do so that I could go back to getting high.
Okay.
And kind of running around, that's because that's what, like I said, I thought I was going to die in my addiction. I didn't know anything else. And, I had seen all the people that I had graduated high school with, and they were living these lives, and I was like, cool, I can't even keep a job, and so in that like kind of lifestyle, I was pretty like, I don't know, I had really good skills, like, to where like people depended on me, people needed me. And so that's where I felt like I really belonged, and that's where I felt like valued the most. So I always wanted to return to that.
Right. That's a good thing. I mean, you didn't really get wrapped up in that prison stuff. You just survived and got out of there. You wanted to make sure you get out of there. I mean, it might not have been the greatest reason, to get back to the drugs, but like for people like us, like the guys, we really dive deep into the politics and we really get involved with prison. A lot of times, a lot of those guys in there don't want to go home. They get stuck in that life.
Yeah.
So that's good. Would you say for women, women are judged more harshly than men if they go to prison?
Yes, for sure. We are.
For example?
I think just because like it's like if you go to gender roles, right? Like for some reason people think that like men should go to like not,
Right,
but you know,
right.
like if you're in this, that like men go to prison. So like if you're in the car, then the guy has to take the rap, right? The guy has to do these things, and so that the women can go. And so when women do go, then it's like, well, what were you doing? You know, like, and it's, I think people think that women should just be like the ones who are just like getting high and like not doing the crime. So when we come to prison, it's like a different type of thing, you know, it's viewed differently. It's not as, like, I think celebrated. I don't even know if that's the right word, but you know, when like you're in that lifestyle and like you go to prison, like, and with the guys, you guys politic and you do all those things, and there's like, you know, some like notoriety that's associated with it. Like we don't have that for the women.
Right.
We don't politic.
Right. And so it's kind of more like people kind of look at it as shameful for a woman to go to prison. That's interesting. And these days, there's a lot of women going to prison.
There's a lot of women. Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of people don't know that. They don't.
Yeah, actually, so in one of my classes, I was doing some research on one of our papers, and they found that the rate that women are going to prison is faster than men going to prison.
Wow. Wow. And is it all behind substance abuse? I mean, not all, but I mean, majority substance abuse or violent? Okay.
I would say, I mean, there's violence too, and I think, but a lot of it, I think, ties with substance use, and then the things that go along with that.
Mm-hmm. Now, let me ask you, how long have you been clean, if you don't mind me asking?
So I got October 3rd, 2014. That's my sobriety date, and that's like the day I made. So over 9 years.
Over 9 years. Congratulations. That's great.
You.
That's great. Yeah. And you basically just knew that you were going to die in your addiction. So you were like, I'm done. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, so when I got sober, the only thing I asked was that I just don't want to go back to prison. Like that drove a lot of the things, you know. I was like, I don't want to die in prison. I don't want to go back into prison. Like that time in Chowchilla, like really being in that environment, I was like, I don't want to be here. Like when it was CIW, it was fine. Like it was like, it's no big deal, you know. But at Chowchilla, I was like, no, this is where I'm going to go, and this is where I'm going to die. And so that's all I wanted. And so whatever it took to not go back to prison again. And so that's when I was like, I have to make different choices, and I don't know how to live life. So let me figure something out, or let me ask people for help. And that's when I started to learn how to ask for help. That's where I started working the steps. I worked with a sponsor. And that's when I really started to really have to take a look at who I was. And I didn't like who I was. You know, I like, you know, for a long time, you know, people think, oh, you went to prison, like you must be badass and all this stuff. And I believed it, you know, especially like at the time, like with the added enhancements, because not a lot of girls had that, you know. And I was like, I felt like it fed like that part of my ego. Yeah. And I realized that like I'm just a scared little girl, you know, like I don't want to fight. Like I don't want to fight. Like I don't want to do all these things, you know. I don't want to live like that. I don't want to be like the person in prison who everybody's scared of, you know, like, and I didn't want to live that life anymore. But that it was hard for me to have to admit that like, I'm just a scared little girl, you know, and that I'm mean to other people because I don't like who I am. You know,
really, really good. Yeah, that's deep. And I'm with you too. I'm a scared little girl too, and I really just, you know, bark loud, but I don't, you know. But no, I can completely understand that, and I'm glad that prison was the scary part or whatever that just made you decide like, hey, I'm done. I don't want to go there, because some people I see, they're just not scared of prison. You know, they're not scared of consequences. So we're talking about how like people like, you know, recognize you for, you know, respect or whatever and things like that in prison. Did you end up meeting anybody in prison that maybe have you respected and maybe that you looked up to in there, or just someone that really impacted your life while you were locked up in prison?
So I wouldn't say that was somebody that like I really looked, because like I said, my friends were there and we just kind of all did everything. But there was somebody that I remember the second term where we were in receiving, and these two girls had come up from YA. So they had just turned 18, you know, and they came up from YA. And I remember one of them, she was African American, and they gave her like 98 years. You know, she didn't even get a life sentence, and she was like 18, and I was like, and she signed for that. Like I was like, and I remember just like they were so scared to go to prison, you know, and they were like, "What's it like?" And I, you know, was telling them and just kind of like talking to them about like what it's going to be like when they went up to Chowchilla. And my heart hurt so much for them, and I remember it's fun. They were hungry all the time because they're still kids, Yeah. So I would try to give them snacks and everything, and I just remember being kind of scared for them and just kind of letting them know, like, however you kind of go into it, it's like, if you don't want to be involved in things, you really don't have to be involved in things, but you make that choice. But once you kind of get involved, you're involved, and it's hard to like take that back. And so but that girl always sat with me. And so when it's at Chowchilla, I was like, I wonder if she's here. So I started to ask about her, and somebody was like, oh no, she's on C Yard. She's in the honor dorm. She's doing really good. And so we were behind work exchange, and they said that she would be going through. So I tried to catch her. And one time I was able to catch her, and I was like, do you remember me? And she's like, yes. And I think to see that she was like in school, she was doing good and like in the honor dorm, and I was like, that's amazing. And so that really, she really stuck with me, and I still wonder, like, I wonder how she's doing. I hope that like she had some action and was able to like, even, I know that when you sign, it's like a different thing.
Yeah.
But to the fact that she was like a minor and they gave her all that time is insane, and because I think that's when I realized too is how skewed our justice system is, you know. It was because she was Black, you know.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And because she was from, like, but she's not even an adult, like her brain isn't formed, and this is like what she grew up in. But the fact that she got like 90 something years, that was crazy to me. And I think that's when I just started to like really see that like it's not like favorable for people who are of color.
No. Oh no, definitely. Or people who don't have the finances
too.
And get a decent defense. It's sad to hear that. Do you feel like you may have saw yourself in her? Is that why? Because I see that you kind of got emotional thinking about her and talking about her. Or was it just the fact that, like, man, this is a little kid?
I think it was the fact that it was just a little kid. And I think that's when it really like struck me too, is that like, had I not had the support that I had from my parents, or like the fact that I could like usually always go back to them, like, you know what I mean, that my life could have been different, and that looking at some of these charges is that, that my first charge, they were trying to do a lot, and because I had the lawyer and I had these things, and then to see that, like, it really brought home of like how much I have in my life.
I get what you're saying. And it's basically, we're privileged in a way. Yeah. Because like when you see people who in circumstances like that, it just makes you realize, man, my life isn't that bad. Hopefully she gets some kind of get back if she's still there, because, they've changed those juvenile laws.
Yes, they have. Thank God.
Yeah. So who knows? Maybe she'll get some action, and that would be great for her. I mean, because I'm with you. I don't feel that someone who was very young, a child, and like you said, their brains aren't fully developed yet, should spend the rest of their life locked up like some animal.
Yeah.
It's messed up. Where's the rehabilitation in that, Yeah, that's very sad. So now that you've been out of prison and you're doing good now, and that you're clean for 9 years, almost 10 years, how does life look to you now when you look back on your life? Is that like someone else? Like, are you like amazed? Are you like, wow, that's a totally different person? Oh
yeah, for sure. 100%. When I like look back and I like think about all the different periods of my life, and I'm like amazed at that. Like I still like made it through alive, that I didn't really have too much like, like the abusive relationships, that was like a lot, but like there's still a lot, that a lot of people have gone through that, like, thankfully, in all the times, all the sketchy places that I've been to, that like a lot of other things could have happened that like didn't happen, and the fact that I'm alive and breathing, and have made it through that is crazy to me.
Yeah. Very crazy, but blessed.
Yes.
Yes. You learn a lot from it, and you're blessed that you're here to share your story, for sure. So people like us, you and I, we go to prison dealing with drugs, dealing with abuse, things like that. We kind of find a certain resilience within ourselves. What was it for you, to stay strong and to never give up? Do you remember a time that you might wanted to give up, and what did you do in order to make it through?
Yeah, there were like quite a few times. I think, like I would say when you start to like get sober and you start to, try to make these changes, it's not like you make the decision once and that's it. Like you have to continually do it every day. Like it's a conscious choice.
Definitely.
That we have to make every day and everything. And, at the beginning it's hard because you're trying to figure out this new life, but I was like living on food stamps. Mm-hmm. I was taking the bus. I was doing, and just thinking like I could go back to selling drugs or doing fraud, and be living a great life until I go to prison, because I always know like that's where I'm going to end up. But it's, the struggle. And I always tell people like the struggle is where you learn what you're made of.